Everything that one man wanted to know, he already knew, but he had to pay someone to show him that he did. Himself. You might also care to note that this is why life don't pay nobody nothing. And the viewer replies, no, he wouldn't care to take such note. At a certain picnic ground, some ants came to hear descriptions of past feasts held there. A few found something to eat, and it wasn't words, and it wasn't maps of the area. For his anniversary, one guy gave himself this useful reminder. If you'll criticize others, they'll always seem dumber than you are, whether they actually are or not. He thanked himself, but brushed it aside, saying, hey, what are friends for? A would-be knight, too affixed to some particular culture or religion, has a horse that is already hobbled. Not only does a more conscious man not have a plagiaristic bone in his body, but if he did, he'd surgically remove it himself. The doctor told himself to get up on the exam table and then said to him, you must remember that there is an operational distinction between being alive and being dead, and then pointed to his head. In the great mental frontier towns, all thieves rest happily in the graveyard. Another reason it's difficult for those with their hands in someone else's pockets to see the horizon clear enough to distinguish the exact nature of tomorrow. The mind, a wound not meant to heal. Nonpartisan consciousness, a cure for an ill not meant to be discovered. Another way to spot the culturally unassuming is if you go to their house and in a closet discover an unworn t-shirt that says, I slept with Betty Crocker and she paid me $1,500 not to broadcast the fact. The price of city humility continues to rise since it has no value. A landlady with many tenants says, if roaches do cost stupidity, then what gives with the fact that all the exterminators I call from the Yellow Pages trying to be dumber than the bugs are? Okay, it's let's get real simple time. If you say you have a problem, you have a problem. As the shoppers stood awaiting the repair of the escalator, one was heard to say, you can always tell the dumb, they always look alike. And another voice asked, did she say always smells alike? And a young boy replied, no, you're confusing the dumb with the serious. And a workman raised his head and says, I'm union and I don't have to take this sort of abuse. And several people at the rear of the crowd began to wonder if this really was an urban department store or if they were somehow back at the stock car track. Another handy tip from our viewer's listener's guide. The first time you hear a particular myth, it's sometimes hard to tell if it is a myth. Especially if you've never heard it before, combined with it being told for the first time. And a viewer far, far away sighs, well, that certainly helps some, but not much. Man's fascinated with dreams because they're the closest most ever get to anything resembling original thought. Yet another view of how and why this kind of stuff ever got going in the first place. To turn neural potential into thought, you must confine it. Then, next thing you know, it wants out. A man told his half-brother-in-law, the great thing about being critical and cynical and sarcastic is that even after everyone who could have been the object of your attack have gone to bed, you can carry on just fine without them. The relative by proxy mulled on this idea for a bit, then asked the man, why did you say just fine? In one land, just over to your left, legend has it that when the great cosmic force created whales and moose and eagles, for hobbies it gave them eating and swimming and screwing and flying. And when it made man, it intensified its focus and gave him an overriding central one, which, turns out, some find just finer than others. Refusing to be discouraged, that certain local school has again revised their motto. The latest version is as follows: the mind is a terrible thing to swallow, lose in the water, or drop from a dangerous height. Excelsior, y'all. Just as the neural knight was prepared to ride away, the king said to him, if you do not have your own little language, you ain't got no language. History as myth as quiz. Why do even 60-year-old people still feel dominated by their parents? For the same reason that in your initial confrontation with life, you blinked and it winked. Up-to-date news. One guy agreed to help save the planet if it'd do the same for him. A viewer writes, after listening to you, I'm beginning to believe that life itself is nothing but a one-liner. The simple are always subject to become members of crude groups, and the fanatically simplistic are always there to encourage them to become members of theirs. Subtitle, Justice. Health news from far beyond anyone's remedial pale. Why, mentally, would a rational person pursue a diet unnourishing, verging on noxious, when it is clearly not to be done physically? Okay, pale, redefined before Hardian climbs the wall. Once you're dead, it's too late to change. Same with grown and educated. Man's ordinary state of consciousness is like a handball game in which everyone else's thoughts are the front wall, while a rejuvenated player has taken his sport far away from any enclosed area. The mythical quest as erotic allegory. A horny man's a happy man when he learns the object of his affection. I don't think we should inadvertently overlook the serious, because the title of that, if you've already forgotten, was The Mythical Quest as Erotic Allegory. It says it right there. The simple left to speak of the need for man to continually recreate himself. This helps give a respectable patina to his ongoing plagiarism. Two tales for the price of one. In the older regions of the wood, all is silent save for the natural sounds of the unthinking native creatures, while in the newer developing areas of the kingdom, much noise that is new accompanies the people's activity. While a man had his dog, who was his best friend, at the vet for a check, the physician said to him, now that your pal is grown and beginning to age, you should put him on a bland and restrictive diet for his own good. And for a while he did. Till one day at feeding time, he looked at his friend and thought, what is life to an animal but to live? And why should he not have those things that his own being silently announces that he most enjoys, regardless of any external diagnosis or prescription? One possible conclusion, cost unknown, thought is one thing, living another. And man, God bless him, has got to do both in spite of what many believe. For those still confused over the distinction, if thinking is to consciousness as the past is to the future, consider, you can think about thinking, but not about consciousness. This item brought to you courtesy of the non-existent, unconfusing society. Daddy, do you reckon that institution really is non-existent, or maybe just unnamed? No. Same thing, my boy, same thing. And believe it or pay a fine, but the lad himself was suddenly less confused. Hormones said, we compete to stay alive. And neurons said, we compete to To make his son feel better, one father said, "Remember, my boy, every time things go right in your life, a little angel dies." Serious folk. One man had a plan. He called it the man plan. He called it the man plan because he didn't know where it came from. The mythical quest as ne'er seen by unmythical eyes. A real knight is his own love and distress, dragon, and ultimate savior. All of this being possible in that life is alive and an endless tale told on a carousel. Possible? Sweet Merlin, try inevitable. And now this traffic report. When this kind of stuff gets a name, it mostly stops being this kind of stuff. And now the weather. Item, a man with a map is halfway home. Second version. A man with a map is inclined to make only half efforts to actually go anywhere. Third time. A man with a map clutched to his bosom is already half dead, and thus has little need to travel anyhow. Daddy, is this why the more alert don't say where they're going? While it is true that physically man cannot live by bread alone, more miraculously even is that mentally he can live by nothing alone. It takes no talent to be simple, dense, and unoriginal, which is why such men so often speak of the matter. Originality, that is. It's good to be able to rewrite your own material while you stand here. The mind should be like a spotlight, forever illuminating the distant horizon. Only problem is that by the time they're grown, most people have already terminally misplaced their horizon. Theatrics. Adam, calling to the future won't help. Going there will. A knight, sure he already knows what his adventure is to be, is a warrior, DOA. Dead on arrival. I thought this was the pathologist convention. Am I not? Did I get in the wrong room? Followed by the embalmer's all-night blowout. Well, you haven't lived until you've had that mixture that they do of gin and formaldehyde. Wild game hunting in neural fields or the futility of mental foot chewing. Simple minds can always argue and find a way out, while the more complex know that they're not trapped. The original create, everyone else criticizes. And lo, the day came when local conditions looked out upon the cityscape and said, "Let them all become critics." And damn, most of them didn't. Daddy, do the visors on knights' helmets drop to cover their full face to keep them from being shot in the mouth? No, son, to keep them from talking. Thoughts, shots in the dark. Revitalize consciousness, unarmed daylight. Amidst the city, criticism remains forever viable and valid in that man forever remains an unfinished work in progress. A man who finally realizes this can then take his beer and bratwurst out to the bleachers, relax, sit in the sun, and enjoy the game. A certain father with that strange certain name one day told his son the following. On some worlds, their myths say that man was created from the very substance of creation itself. On others it is held that he came about ex nihilo, from no substance at all, and was created from no more than the mere will of creation. This leaves us with a great cosmic question, son, of just where the hell did the likes of us come from? The universal is gradual, only individual examples abrupt. As everyone made their individual departure from the original Garden of Silent Paradise, they had a momentary encounter eyeball to eyeball with life itself. Most, as they should, blinked and turned away, but a few somehow did not, as life smiled and shouted, "Next." The curious thing about this curious adventure is that a man with no past may have a future. Last time, I was talking somewhat about the kind of parallel between the idea, at least the way we've been using it, generations, of there being a distinct, from their view, a quantum dividing line between generations, in the same way that there is a distinct dividing line in the matter of time, that there is, without any sort of pseudo-metaphysical arguments and discussions, there is a difference between yesterday and today, just physically, materially. And if you ask anyone, and the age is not all that of exact importance, but if you ask someone, is there a difference between what you think, your taste, what you believe, and what your parents do? Or just anybody, if you say, you know who older people are, and they say, oh yeah. You say, all right, the older people now in your area, do they have a distinct difference of opinion, taste, everything from art, music, morals, ideas of success than you do? And it's always yes. Even the mainstream, the middle class kids and the middle class, I say kids of a young generation and the one older. And I was also trying to get you to consider what I was meaning by the continuing use for the time being of civilization, which is the actual departure from the one I mentioned tonight of the silent woods. It is that which is reflected in all of the stories, such as the drive of humanity from a garden, from a erstwhile paradise somewhere. The paradise was where the beavers are. The paradise was where the hobbies were that life gave to the moose and the eagles and the whales. Sleeping and screwing, swimming, fighting a little bit, taking a run. But after that, it was a new hobby. And the new hobby became civilization. And the new hobby of civilization is the same as the mind. It is a non-healing wound. And it's only the ordinary people, just regular old blister brains like most people are, that criticize, that turn around. Well, they would laugh at that. They could say, hey, now he's getting somewhere because he's getting to be smart ass. Now we'll take on people. We'll take on the Democrats, the Republicans, the Irish, the Italians, somebody. The whole idea also of criticism, the way I've been trying to get you to consider it, of criticism is you're criticizing a game that's never finished. You're criticizing a wound that will not heal. You're criticizing the non-stop movement of one generation to another, technology, everything that apparently moves in some beneficial manner does so in a non-ending process, that there is not the final invention, if we're speaking of technology. There's not the final word in morality. Now, the ordinary stuck in any generation, being held by the time of their own genes over a period of 60 or 70 years, they believe that there is. For instance, now if you ask an ordinary person, do we finally have the right idea, let's say, about sexual morality? And they'd say, well, yes. And they'd say, at least yes, compared to my fathers or my grandfathers. Well, is this about it? Yes, it is. Or you say, well, how about music? And they start naming who their favorite group is. And you'd say, well, can they be improved upon? And they say, well, no, this is it. You say, well, have you ever heard what your grandfather or your father listened to? Yeah, I've heard some of that stuff. The attitude is, well, we have finally now reached a place wherein, they don't describe it this way certainly, but they have reached a place that they consider we have reached an abrupt climax we have reached the fruition of music, art, literature, morality. They are saying, in essence, that we have become fully civilized. They very likely would not use such a term, but that is what they're saying. What I was going to try to get you to consider was the drawings, a little diagram I'd done so many times of the human nervous system, my little version of the spine, and the human brain and all of its many rococo and the level of consciousness. It is this that by any definition, unless you're completely tied up, and if you're potential nightly, that is K nightly, horse is not already hobbled, that is that you're too tied to some religious or cultural or nationalistic or racial or political background, then the only difference between you and anything that would resemble a human on this planet and yet not be human, that could not talk, the only difference is what operates in the cerebral cortex area of the brain. And that's it. And it's only for the crude, and I'm not in any sort of debate with them, that believes the idea that there's some kind of human spirit or soul stuck down your heart or in your liver or in your spleen, or that they can't find it. There's one distinguishing aspect, and it's demonstrative, and everyone knows it. It's just a little too-point blank, and so people like to pretend otherwise. And that is the human intellect. That's it. If it wasn't for that, we'd all be mooses and whales and beavers and sheep and cows. Or, of course, worse than that. If you don't know the truth, we'd be humans that couldn't think. I guess I'm stretching it too far, but just for a second. Assuming, if any of you, if your mother or somebody was frightened by a moose or a hippo, a South American warthog, let's say, and if you thought, that's the ugliest thing in the world, or a snake or an alligator. No. There's something worse. Worse than your worst nightmare. If you're out trudging through the forest of Brazil and you suddenly ran upon one of these South American warthogs, and you thought, that is the most terrible thing no. If suddenly a human came out, a regular Homo sapien that could not think, and it came out of the bush, came out of the woods right next to that warthog, if you had any sense, the warthog's nothing. I mean, you can take the warthog, you can turn it into a pet, but that is frightening. All right, the distinguishing feature, I was going to try to tie some more of it together. You can look at, literally, once you can see it, of down here we're talking about everything that we have in common with everything else that's alive all the way from, not just warthogs, and I'm not playing some crude meta-anthropological game with what humans are on this planet, but everything from trees to warthogs to meteors, you got the same thing in common with them. It is only up here that there is any possible distinction, and it is only up here that the other things that I was trying to drag in exist. The concept of time, a sense of a difference in generations, an intellectual difference, because you do not follow your parents around. You're still, as one of them said tonight, you're not, using you generically, you're not impressed by your parents after you're 50 or 60 years old and still feel subject to them on the basis that you are learning something on a physical level. That's not what it is. So it's only in the intellect that there is a concept of a change between generations, that is, which is really a concept of time, or a sense of civilization. That is a sense that we should change, because that's what civilization is saying. That is what all of the old religious ideas of man being, having at some time crossed swords with the creative force, that somebody made God mad, and God said, get out of here, you're going to have to go repent for your transgressions. You're going to have to pay off this debt, which is another way of saying you're going to have to think. None of the religions, being part-time employees of life anyway, so life knows what it's doing, but none of them, if you notice, ever come up with a story of all the curses that the gods give all the way from the Judaic Christian over to the Taoist idea, the Hindu ideas of anything that the gods would do to man, the creative forces. They've done everything like the Western world They threw him from the garden where you were down in the nervous system below the level of consciousness, threw him out of the garden. And if I remember, the general curse was, you're going to have to go out and work for a living. You had it made when you were in here. You didn't have to talk. You didn't have to call in sick to the boss because you couldn't talk. But get out of here. You guys didn't do what I told you, so get out of here. And the curse is you're going to have to work. The real curse, don't wait for religion to come up with. But the real curse was if a God had said, all right, you made me mad. I told you what to do and you wouldn't do it. So think. Well, it's really more than double-barreled. It's like a triple-barrel curse, because if you can follow this now, back at that point, right up until that second before God did that and threw Adam and Eve and Ken and Barbie out of the garden, right before that minute, they couldn't think. So they didn't know what it was. So it was not just a shock. And plus, it never worked. Go back to their version, the biblical version. He's right, get out and work. Of course, we'll assume that simultaneously, in some way, he had to throw into their head the understanding of what work was, because up until then, it was just loaf time. They had to expend as much effort as an intellectual in Mississippi. He said. So at the same time they laid the curse on him, he had to say, when he said, all right, you're going to have to go out and work for a living, he had to let them know what work was. That was bad enough. I think I'll agree. I don't think we'll have to take a vote. If anybody enjoys work that much, I don't know what you're doing here. You should be out working tonight. Trying to get ahead. Ahead, figuratively speaking, not try to get ahead. That does not come about as one of the side benefits of the marketplace. But I would suggest to you that the real curse would have been that if he said, all right, think, damn it. Of course, simultaneously also, he would have had to make them know immediately what think was. But I'm saying that would have been a double or triple barrel curse, because going out to work, he had to make them think so that they'd know what the word work was. So that was bad enough. But if he said the curse is to think, I know we'll regret that I went to all this trouble just to get to this point, and I can feel it already. But here, Ken and Barbie had to go, because suddenly they could think, and simultaneously understood, we didn't want to do this. Well, sometimes you take a chance. There's the civilization. There is the full thing. I know it sounds metaphorical, and I can make it metaphorical. You can take it that way. But from the line down, you've got the past. You've got the silence. You have got everything that was pre-cursed in man, as they call it. You have got, and you've also got, quote, curiously enough, unquote, you have also got the idea at the ordinary level of the paradise of the future, which is simply returns to the original paradise. I know that all the religions that believe in such or teach such say that something in the future. But even if you are not religious, how about people who believe that there is some sort of extraordinary work that they can make to improve themselves, expand their consciousness, or do something in this lifetime? Whether they use the word specifically or not, it is all an idea that it's something that's been lost. Even if they claim to be atheists and they have put no value whatsoever into stories about God throwing Adam and Eve or humanity from some paradise, they would say this. They could even take what I'm talking about if they followed some. So you're right. At one time, we were better off, which is just another way. Tonight, there was one that said one guy agreed. He told the planet that he'd help save it if it'd do the same for him. Those who consider that they are above ordinary people, who consider that they're above, more intelligent, more sophisticated than the fundamentalist religious people of the world, their form now, they've got several, they always have one, but one is now that rather than us destroying ourselves and making God mad, we're destroying the planet. Like that we're smarter than the planet is, we've got more power than the planet does. I might also point out to you that no one within earshot of an earthquake, a volcano, a tidal wave, a typhoon, you do not hear comments such as that. Just thought I'd point that out. In fact, contraire, if you had a bunch of ecologists standing out, and somebody looks up and says, George, do you see that there seems to be a tidal wave coming to us that I'm estimating is like, I'm saying somewhere between 70 and 80 feet high? You do not suddenly hear someone say, And that reminds me of the kind of litter we see on the beach. How much longer will nature and this planet put up with us? The reason I went through that again is not to give would-be smartasses a cheap laugh. That is the same thing that people are involved with in past times, and even now in past times in their own nervous system, of trying to placate the gods. They're saying, well, in some way we made God mad and we've got to make up for it. Think about it. And that's the same people, of course you've got to be able to do it, that also normally all religions exhort us to be humble. We'd like to take a few seconds, everybody think about it. I will be humble, unassuming, and yet in some way I've managed to alienate God, hurt his feelings, or make him so mad that he put me to work. You can look at it as one form of, you could say, sort of mechanical progress, that there are people who now say, well, I no longer believe that, but they're the same ones that are now ecologists. Same thing. It is all an idea that we're up here. And this is tied to the generations also. This also up here, you get to the point that your hormones start slowing down. And it's been changing a little bit nowadays. By the time you're 21, probably at least, you're already beginning to die hormonally. You're beginning to wear down. And that's when things start looking bad. And the older you get, as long as you stay physically alive and upright on this planet, the more, and you can't help it if you're ordinary, the more that there's no doubt right behind you, things are absolutely going to hell. You don't have to be religious. You don't even have to be psychologically inclined. You do not have to be sociologically involved. You just feel it. If somebody says, what do you think about life compared, just the way things are now than when you were, 18 or 19? And anybody on this planet, Norman Vincent Peale, if he is still alive, or Napoleon Hill or somebody, if they were still alive and you took them aside and you slapped them right quick and said, nobody's listening, tell me, how do you feel? How's the things going? And they go, God damn, life's beginning to suck. These people are nuts. Which also the ordinary, if I made them admit that for some reason, they would also turn right around and say, all right, there's the proof of what, to countervene what I just said, there's the proof that we are getting worse because we all feel it. Right. So it's obviously true. Hey, majority rules, right? Right. Aside, humans say that. They forget the majority rules means that life rules. For all of you who nodded like me, that's true. The feeling that there's any sort of progress to be made, ordinary people feel, all the way from religious, which like I said, I'll assume most of you are past that, but the idea that in some way we'll be paid, we'll get our reward after death. And what's the reward sound like? I know it's described in all sorts of ways in various religions, but it's always described as a dead man. They say, no, he's been revived, but they're describing him as a dead man. He never gets sick, he never gets hungry, he never gets horny, at least not enough to fool my wife. He's not greedy, he doesn't want anything I've got. He's humble, he never toots his own horn. What are we talking about? A dead man. He fits all the requirements. Well, there's more though. Not just that. Not just that. If we got a cheap laugh, an ordinary person, well, yeah, I see what you mean. But it's more than that. More subtle than that. Everything they describe, if we didn't pull that on them, and I say pull that on them, I can say to you, because all you got to do is look in your own nervous system, whether you consider yourself religious or not, genetically, it is already and somewhere imprinted you're still dealing with that kind of aspect of being a human, because it's up here, it's not in your soul, but it's up here. At any rate, they still describe, if we did away with that part of me describing a real Jew or Christian or Muslim as being a dead man, or conversely, a dead man's the only one who fits the requirements. Because if you talk, to the Pope of Christians, the Pope of Jews, or the Pope of Hindus, and you say, does anybody fit the requirement of a real Jew or Christian? They would even, of course the big guys got to sham the humility and go, well, no, not even me. But all you got to do is think, wait a minute, who would fit the requirements, whatever the religion is? Who would fit all these requirements right now? A dead man. But now wait, we're going to refine it. If we didn't do that, and I just said, all right, consider what everyone's idea of improvement, or of a better person, a real Jew, a real Christian, a real humanitarian, a real humane Homo sapien, what would it be? Now, no matter what they start describing, even if we're now freed from religious terminologies and paradigms, what would they start describing? They can't help it. They would start describing the past. Always. Think about it a second. We got a second. Try it yourself. I'm not picking on any specific person. But if you try to think, if you go out now to an AA meeting or an AAA meeting, is that people that have drunk cars or a drug program or people trying to lose weight or people trying to gain weight? In other words, self-improvement. Or people that are psychiatrists paying the big bucks. What are they trying to do? Do we want to take another second? They're trying to put the damn thing in reverse. What's all forms of self-improvement? If you ask a man, are you engaged in self-improvement? Yes, I'm taking a program. I'm trying to improve my memory. I'm trying to lose weight. No matter what they say self-improvement, they never hear it. Think about it a second. Self-improvement, and you're trying to do what? Well, I'm trying to lose weight. I've put on 50 pounds. That's self-improvement. Are you just a common guy just coasting through life? Not me. I'm always working on myself. What are you doing now? Well, I'm in this 12-step program. In fact, it's 13. We're working our way up to stop smoking. And it all sounds great until you think, wait a minute. You're going to lose the weight you put on. You're going to quit smoking after you pick up the hobby. You're going to quit drinking after you start drinking. And that's progress. Now think about it. I'm marching on. I'm going forward. I'm going forward. Self-improvement, I'm going to stop all these nasty habits that I picked up back there. Do you see that everyone's idea at the ordinary level of some great reward, or not just self-improvement now, if you want to push a little bit further and get into what would appear to be mythical or metaphysical areas, not just now people trying to quit smoking or drinking, but I assume everybody from your chuckles and heavy breathing that you understand that ordinary forms of people saying I'm improving myself, what they're saying is, I want to back up and be like I was before I got this bad. That is simply a local version of the universal run of humanity. What I'm saying, that the mind believes once you get past the point that the hormones begin to die, say 21, and you start to become the older generation, your own older generation, inside yourself, you see that all the future of man is where? I'm using the past. For those of you who don't know, I sometimes draw a two-dimensional line that there's the past over on your left, like on a page, and it goes up, and there's the future running off the page, apparently. Now, people's ideas, there's some little line here in the middle, a perpendicular line. This is me right now. I'm conscious. I'm right here, and I'm aware. And there's the past back here. My past, humanity's past, but who cares about that unless you're a historian for a living. But my past, the important stuff. Screw all this stuff about the Renaissance and the Greeks and my past, that's what we're talking. They see the history of man, the future of man. Think about it. You don't have to just take my words. They see the history, the future of man, as being the past. That's all dreams of the great future. That's the dreams of tomorrow is back there. There's several reasons why. Well, there's one simple one. One is that nobody knows the future if you're tied to the past. The other one is down here is the only place that man ever feels there's any sort of completion, that there is any sort of satisfaction. Because up here is a wound not meant to heal, to quote myself for the night. It is only from the level of consciousness down, it is only down at our common ancestry and current history along with the elk and the cows. It is only down there that anything can apparently be accomplished. It is only down there that any sort of satisfaction that resembles permanency, or at least a permanency overnight, let's say, that is only from the line down. You get hungry and you eat, and you're not hungry for 8 hours. Or you're horny and you screw, and I don't go in anybody's sex life, we'll assume for a few minutes. For a while, you're no longer horny. The problem is taken care of. You're sleepy, you go to sleep, and you wake up, and I'm all right now. From up here, that's why the older generation, We're going to have to jump real fast because it's all, you understand. I'm speaking symbolically. But down here is why the younger generation never likes the older generation, because they're dead. They may be alive and staying around, but that's why humans don't like themselves. That's why humans, the so-called, what do they call it? The rebellion of the teenage years? No. I tell you what it is. It's God, the silent God, the Jehovah, the Allah of everybody, down in your own nervous system, trying to grab up and say, you're going to have to get civilized. And what you won't say is, hey, later for that. I'm not getting civilized. I'm not getting a job and a haircut. I'm not going to become you. Of course, you're pointing at your parents normally. I'm not going to become you. I'm not going to die. Yes, you are, if you're ordinary. That's already been established. Because at the time, I gave a new version tonight. At the time, when do I point? Does that help me quote myself? It's a stalling tactic while I'm trying to remember what I wrote. They said when everyone was initially driven from that silent garden, just as you were leaving, going by, it wasn't some angel, it wasn't Jehovah or somebody staying there. It was life. And when you went out the garden, which is when you stepped over this line, that's when you, 5, 6, 7 years old, the intellect really got operating. You began to talk in such a way that it meant something to you, that you listened to yourself. Not just going, nah, nah, but actually talking. That's when you stepped from the garden, and at that very moment, that one moment when you went out of the exit of the garden, to jump back to the Judo-Christian, when God said, get out of here and go to work. Get out of here and take your curse. Get out of here and go talk and think. When you went out of the garden, when you went across that line and you began to be an intellectual creature, what you had was a split second. When you went out the gate, it wasn't some archangel, it wasn't God, it was life. And just as you went out, you and life got like that. I'm talking about dead on. And everybody did it. You had a split second, and life looked you dead in the eye, and you looked at it. And everybody goes, you blink and you turn away. And life said, next. There are some who struggle not to, and you'd even know why. Using you generically again. And that's what all this kind of stuff's always about. It is what, at the real basic level, all religion's about, all forms of would-be mysticism, all of the cults in the widest sense of the word. Everything that you ever heard about and been exposed to, it seemed to be some sort of mystical hocus pocus or some group of people trying to do something extraordinary, you're not sure what. It is people, to give them all some sort of very loose credit, that they did not absolutely forget the time that they looked life dead in the eye for a split second. They end up blinking. You have to. It's in the same way you end up being in the condition that you are, whoever you are, because you got no choice to start with. You have to grow up. You have to become your own worst nightmare. That is, you have to become your own parent. You have to become your own daddy, in a non-sexual sense. You have to do that. You have to do that until you ever get to the point that you might be able to do anything about it, assuming there's anything to be done about it. But most people just absolutely give it up. Or I put it another way, most people have the ability to absolutely, through some kind of great strength of mind, to be able to forget it ever happened. If you'd like to try and put that together and give a whole new meaning to the word oxymoronical, I guess. To forget that it happened. It is the necessary movement from a person being a child to being an adult, from being part of the future, which is what happens when you're a child, till you begin to be an adult. 21, you're yesterday's news. You're dead. But from an ordinary view, as you should be, you're not dead. There's nothing pejorative about my comment. You are now an adult. You're civilized. You're perhaps getting close to finally getting your master's degree. Maybe finally get a good job and get off your parents' back and payroll. Becoming a stout little member of society. That's what you're supposed to be. But you're also becoming how shall I put it? How about dead? You're becoming a critic. I mean, if you ever want to check your age, you don't have to look at your driver's license. I mean, if you're trying to check your metaphorical age, you don't have to check your driver's license. All you got to do is ask yourself, is life beginning to suck now worse than it did last week? Those of you who are really fast, you don't have to answer the question. See, if you'll tolerate the question, I mean, you don't have to come up with an answer if you'll tolerate the question. It's already been answered. There's some use to that. I'll stop 1 second. If the great cosmic force, if somebody came down and says, we want to check whether there's any possibilities you might ever be able to understand more about life or expand your consciousness, or whether you're just a run-of-the-mill shithead. And you go, okay, I'm interested. And life says, all right, I got a question for you. I got this test. It's one question, and we can absolutely ascertain your metaphorical, your mythical, nay, mystical age. Very hush-hush between, all we got to do, you answer this one question. You go, okay, got it. And life says, are you ready? Yep. Do you think life is getting worse than it used to be? And if you go, you don't have to go any further. He may just entertain you, go ahead and finish the question, but he's already lost interest. Internally, life's already said, next, because you failed. Or looked at it another way, you passed. You're still ordinary. If you say, now answer truthfully. I won't take offense, but do you feel like just life on this planet, civilized, human, ordinary life, existence, is it getting better or worse? And you go, well. Like I said, life being the gentleman I know it to be, he may stand there physically, if you knew it, and go, well, take your time. But you do understand you failed. As soon as life said, would you answer, of course, if you're really good, if life said, would you answer a question for me, you would have left. Life doesn't give prizes. And life does not ask questions except of the simple. That's why the simple talk so much. That's why the simple want to talk about originality and being mentally alive, being creative. They like to talk about it. Why? Because it's a dream. It is an inverted, for those of you that used to mash your pimples when you were younger, it's an inverted fait accompli. I guess we have truly trampled oxymoronical under all foot, so never mind. It is the call, what I was going to get to, finally. It is the call between the past and the future. It is between civilization and the otherwise. We won't even say what it is, but the otherwise. All of this is literally, beyond any chronological measurements, that is the past. It does not go away. No, just because now, an hour ago, it was 7 o'clock here on the East Coast. It is now 7 o'clock in the Central Time Zone. Does that mean that 7 o'clock disappeared? I mean, we know it didn't there, but here we stand. So did 7 o'clock, did it go away? Did it go to live with Jesus and Elvis? Did 7 o'clock simply disappear? Is there no more 7 o'clock? Well, now you're laughing, and I'll assume that your laugh at least exhibits your agreement that surely it didn't disappear. All right, did the past disappear? Did the uncivilized, feral aspect of man disappear? In your nervous system, below the line, below the level of consciousness, below that point at which you were going from the silent garden, from what was a childish paradise, where you could do in your pants and throw it at your sister, and if you're a man, wave your wanker out the window as you drive along, and everybody they laugh at you. The difference between that and being an adult, is the difference between the literal past and the future. Within everyone's nervous system, this shouldn't come as a surprise, and it's the basis, of course, for all ideas of demons and all forms, from the Hindu statuary to Buddhist sand paintings to the literal interpretations as they are now given in Judaism and Islam and Christianity, all the way from that to the psychological models of man, of the great subconscious mind, which nobody ever wants to just stand up and say, the subconscious mind, pardon me for saying so. Growing up in a somewhat fundamentalist religious background, I'm playing a part now. The guy says, pardon me, but after now hearing about psychology and reading it, has anybody noticed that the subconscious mind sounds a lot like Lucifer? But anyway, all of the ideas, every myth is now taken as fact by some of the more simple of the world still, but all ideas of demons, evil forces, all the way from that to the idea of subconscious motivations or a subconscious mind, subconscious trauma, subconscious traumas that are now driving you beyond your own knowledge, much less control. All of that's one thing and one thing only. It's the past. It is that you're living in, say, the Pacific. I'll be magnanimous. You're now living in the Pacific time zone, all right? That your brain, your level of consciousness, is now on Hollywood, if not Beverly Hills time. Yeah. But down below, you've still got Fort Lee, New Jersey in you. You've still got the Eastern time zone. It's right there. And it's Fort Lee, New Jersey. It's New Jersey in general that you keep trying to bias down. That everybody does. That the popes, the presidents, your mama, your daddy, you, society, keep saying, wait a minute, we got to do something about New Jersey. It's like the sun. Now turn around to some clouds and saying, I thought we left New Jersey. I thought that was over. It's humanity looking back and go, well, those Babylonians were a wild bunch of bastards, but hell, I thought they were dead and done for. They're not dead and all you got to do is go, there's Babylonia. There's the past. There is what ordinary people, including the most intellectual at the ordinary level, that's their idea of paradise. That's their idea of progress. Maybe I'll die, and if I've been real good, I'll go to paradise, or I'll go to heaven, and I can doo-doo in my pants. I can wave my wanker out the window. I can try and pull down other little girls' panties. I can spit up. Is that the same thing as being dead? I thought we'd already established that was the idea, was being dead. Sounds like a different story, except for this. If you can revert to the past, you are dead. That's what all routine forms of attempted self-improvement are. Which, to conclude, is what makes activity, and I don't mean me, I'm simply playing the part of me. This is not actually me, as some of you know. I'm playing a part. But that's what makes activities, not me, but that's what makes activities like this throughout history so popular, so well known. It's because everything that would seem to be a form of self-improvement is, how can I put it delicately? I can't. All right, waste of time. Bad hobby. There's no ordinary literate description. Now, if you were interested in doing something with yourself, there is a description that fits all the requirements, and that is that all ordinary forms of self-improvement are misdirected. That's all you need to know. There is nothing to improve. When everyone else talks about self-improvement, whether it be under a religious context, whether it be under a counseling context, whether it be changing their behavior, whether it be under a psychological model, they're talking about one thing, is they wish they could climb back down the nervous system while not actually doing so. No. Because if you described it too specifically to them, they go, no, what you're saying is that all we want to do is be uncivilized again. And a civilized man cannot say that. Even if it's true, and I'm not saying that is a literal telling of it, but even if that were true, you cannot get a civilized man, no matter how sophisticated, no matter how worldly wise and well-read and philosophically bent he might be. You cannot get him to say, well, the whole idea to you of being more civilized is to be less civilized. That's your idea of a dream world. They've got to say what? No. That's no. They've got to deny it. You cannot grab a man, a professor of philosophy at Harvard, and yank him over in the little foyer out of a cocktail party on Friday with his little tweeds and just representing the upper middle class. the mainstream of human life. You can't take them aside and say, to you, utopia, paradise on earth, your own personal progress into a new world would be if you were out, maybe an outlaw, a hell's angel. What's he going to say? I don't mean he's incorrect, and I don't mean he's lying, and I don't mean that he is subconsciously incapable of doing so. Life makes him deny it. But he has no other picture of what paradise is. To him, paradise is to go back where I came from. Well, where'd you come from? And nobody's sure. Of course, where they came from was the same place they're going. Down. Or to put crudely, Mother Earth. But you can't say, well, wait a minute, you came from the dead and that's where you're headed back to. An ordinary man's not going to travel with that, not intellectually. He's going to travel with it. Everybody's on that bus, but the more intellectual a man is, the more he has got to deny, the more he has got to naysay such a claim, strike claim, such a fact, and say, no, there's more to it than that. Sure there is. There's dreams, there's imagination. There's looking out the window of the bus, and it kind of fogs over. You know, you can draw on it, and you can draw pictures, you know, like on this big window. All of you go on a Greyhound. If you haven't, you're culturally deprived. Now you ride, and you got 65 years, and you got this big old window. And you can, you know, if the humidity doesn't change enough, you can do it yourself. Go, you kind of fog over, and right there on that window, you can start drawing pictures like the Taj Mahal or the Eiffel Tower or a cave in Tibet. All these places that you might be, and if you just kind of let your eyes glaze over, you can believe that you're there. You're on a Greyhound bus in the middle of Texas, or wherever you live, in New Jersey, but you go, and you draw pictures. No, you're supposed to. There's only one place that there is any form of self-improvement, if there is such a thing. There's only one place that the whole idea of paradise, the whole idea as it is taken, and I'm not commenting, I'm not criticizing, but the whole idea of what the purpose of religion should be, or of any form of mystical or mythical effort, it is one thing and one thing only. Right over there, it's the future. But if you ask anybody living in the past that's still tied to the past, all right, what's the point of it? That's the whole thing of me saying you go and grab the Pope, not just picking on Catholicism, using that as an archetype. You grab the most religious person in the world, the most philosophical person. Socrates' great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, son. And you grab them and say, what is the purpose of humanity? Where are we going? What should we be doing? His feet are still down here. I mean, his intellectual feet are still back in the mud of Eden. It's still back in the hormones that they're supposed to be. And the only thing he can describe, if he says, well, I'll describe the future. It's the same way as religious people saying, well, we'll describe what heaven will be like. Well, what do they describe? The best they can do is come up and they'll describe it'll be a place full of flying pigs. That's the closest they can come to something original. It'll be a place, there'll be these wondrous giraffes with wings and their necks will be real short. And you think, God, that's mystical. That is real. That takes your breath away unless you think about it. And you think, wait a minute, if it's the future, if it is something different, and if it's something that I should work for, how is it different? What will be unique about it? What will be singularly satisfying to me that I don't have now? And they go, glad you asked. And what will they describe? The best they can do is some dreamy or nightmarish version of yesterday. But you can't do otherwise, can you? And the answer is no. Not at that level. Because that level is still tied as a kid and an old man arguing. They're dancing. It is you dancing with you, and I don't mean a subconscious, and I don't mean some sort of evil aspect of you. It is the past in you. It is the past below the level of consciousness, and you have to do a tango with it. Sometimes you apparently move a little bit, and then you've got to go back this way. It's not a matter of gender anymore. It's you dancing with you, and you don't always lead. Well, since we're out of time, I'll tell you the truth. You don't ever lead. But it's when you're in the local conditions, on a ballroom, you apparently can lead. It's just as always, you've got to look at it locally. You can't look at it universally and think, I wonder who owns this ballroom? Who is it that determines the music that's played? I don't have time to talk about that. Too busy dancing. Well, make yourself at home now.